to have another human being literally solely rely upon you for their very existence, for the life that they are going to continue to live, is a very scary feeling. And the exhilarating part of it all comes into play, because if you could take that fear and turn that into something positive and constructive, then you can overcome anything, any odds, and literally save and rescue this person, this human, this life. We were in Syria, and I was swimming in the Euphrates River, literally free floating with my legs, a bridge cable, which is not light, while circumnavigating around rebar and exploded concrete from a 60-ton pylon that held up a massive bridge that I can't remember, either ISIS bombed it or the American forces bombed it, and now we needed to go back onto the other side of the bridge, and it was this massive combat operation. And right in the middle of it, I'm swimming in the Euphrates River, which is a biblical river, a historic river, you know, one of the original rivers described in life and in history. And the waters aren't crazy, but they're choppy enough to where you have to keep a full set of oxygen in your lungs. You have to really keep yourself kicking hard with full buoyancy, and then time it with the splash as you're keeping your face above the choppiness of the water, because if you don't, you're going to suck down water, start coughing, and immediately start sinking, because that's what happens when you're lifting weight and you're just treading water with it over your head. And I was trying to wrap it around this blown up pylon, and then about halfway through I realized how serious of a task this turned out to be, and I'm almost getting hurled into these bars and impaled. Finally I make it to the boat, and I'm only wearing probably like a t-shirt and cami bottoms and boots, and I remember somebody comes screaming from the other side with one of the Zodiacs. They go, "Hey, we've got some POWs, or some injured, we got some injured, hop on board." And so I hop on board, and we drive across the rest of the Euphrates River to the side where we had pushed the enemy up and back into. And there was this chick, and I remember very vividly the stench of bile as I walked up and ran up onto her. She had been shot or fragmented, I don't remember, probably an RPG, fragmented in the gallbladder. And so all her bile was just raw, and it was just leaking out. And her intestines had been penetrated, and so the fecal stench was coming out of it. And she was banged up pretty bad, but she was very cool, she was very calm, almost at complete peace and serenity. The moment, I take that back, she became peaceful and full of serenity the moment that we got up to her and she heard that the Americans were there, because she knew that we were going to give her grade A medical treatment. It was a SEAL 18 Delta, myself, and then one of my teammates, Adam, Recon Marine turned into MARSOC Marine. She was going to get some good treatment. I mean, that was the best hands that she could possibly be in at that point in time, being in the austere Syrian countryside environment that we were, battling ISIS deep into Syrian territory as we forced them back to close in on Raqqa, their stronghold. And we're in the middle of this multi-day massive combat operation, and all sorts of stuff's going on. All sorts of stuff was crazy over the period of 5 or 10 days. And she becomes serene. So we take her and we double check her patched up word was really good. There was an Army SF medic in the field, or maybe a Delta guy who was up there and was able to patch her up really well. So we brought her back onto the boat. We're cranking the Zodiac, Adams cruising on it. 18 Delta SEALs over here. I'm right here, and she's just serene, but she's banged up pretty bad. And we're trying to maintain IV and keep her vitals going, and we don't want to blow out the healing and the clotting that she's done. And all of a sudden, the engine dies. And in Zodiacs, I don't know how they are now, but at least back in that day, it was pretty common where somebody who was sitting where I was sitting would be kneeling on the fuel line, because the fuel bladder sits up in the front of that vehicle, inside of that Zodiac boat, and then there's a line that runs to the back motor where Adam was driving. And it's not uncommon for guys to be kneeling, especially when they're trying to care for a medical patient, on that line, or maybe even the patient is on the line. But I think she was on a stretcher, if I recall correctly. So I get my knee up, and I'm like, I'm not on the line. I grab the front of the hose where it's supposed to connect into the bladder, and there is nothing, there's no bladder. Somebody had taken the fuel out of the boat, and we had been cruising on the fumes left within the actual hose itself, and we're about halfway across the Euphrates River. And like I said, it's choppy and it's moving and it's pushing southward. And the way that we're fighting ISIS, battling them uphill, basically we had control of this area and this area beyond the river, but further down the river there was no control of U.S. forces, and so it was just straight bad guy territory. And here we are crushing them, pushing them down into those southern regions. And so the last thing you want to do is be a couple of Americans and a Kurdish chick who's injured. We're basically unarmed, floating down the river of the Euphrates right into bad guy hands and territory, because you're just going to get shot all the fuck up if they don't just drive a jet ski out there rigged with explosives and literally crank themselves off as they run into you, which was a real thing. They had jet ski borne IEDs. We realized we don't have any fuel. So all of us instantly kicked into instinctive mode, where we all looked on the sides of the boats. There were paddles. We grabbed the paddles and we just started hauling across the Euphrates River. And this woman was relying on us. She was relying on us to literally save her life. She was dying. She was very gravely wounded. She had massive gashes in her abdomen region, multiple massive gashes, barely holding in her guts. Gallbladder with bile spilt out all over the place. Intestines punctured with fecal matter, making her septic, giving her infection and fever. And not to mention all the small fragmentations and just being concussed and dazed and confused and everything else, with her brain basically being jello at that point from having a rocket-propelled grenade go off right next to her. She relied on us to save her life, to get her to the other side of that river and on to the good triage facilities back in the rear.
Dad.
With American doctors. What's up, buddy? Oh, your tire broke. Let's see.
Maybe these ones are
No, there you go. Yep, it's all better. All right. I love you, buddy. And when I looked at her with a totally cool, calm, and collected face, or at least so I remember it, I remember her looking right back at me with those serene eyes. And for a second, her eyebrows were like, should I be worried about something? And I was just like, no. And then we got the paddles, and we started hauling across the river. An immense amount of fear came over me, an immense amount of just petrification, because something that we did negligently, somehow a fuel bladder got removed from the boat. We ended up in this boat as a medevac boat. We screwed up, and now we're in the middle of the river, floating downstream into bad guy territory. She's gravely wounded, and we've got no engine, no fuel. And the river's about 1 kilometer wide, so it's a couple kilometers wide, so it's a decent enough distance to where we have to really make ourselves known because we don't have a radio. So we're hauling, but they're putting that bridge together. They're still getting all this stuff out. There's still major combat operation going on, and we're hauling, and all this stuff is taking place. And all the while, I just remember being in such a state of clear mental focus, where it was like nothing else in the world mattered except digging and digging hard and digging in unison. And it was like all three of us were in an absolute flow state, in sync with each other, crushing it up against the tides and the currents of the Euphrates River that was trying to push us down into Baghdad territory. We were going to save this woman's life. Nothing was going to stop us. We were in sync. We were in time. We got 2 Marsoc Marines and a Navy SEAL. We were gonna beat that fucking shit. There was nothing that was gonna hold us back whatsoever at all. We were destroying it. We were beating the tide. No tide that God could have possibly surmounted that day would have defeated us. And our drive and our resolute to save that young woman's life, this warrior, this freaking awesome badass chick who had no choice but to fight in this horrendous war, this disgusting war where people are just massacred and raped and beaten and orphaned, and parents are losing children, and there's kidnappings taking place, and it's just the most disgusting and abusive of circumstances, genocide all across the Middle East, multiple countries. This is what people's lives are, and she has to fight now just to survive. She doesn't have a choice. She doesn't get to just go to college. She doesn't get to just start a family. She doesn't get to just travel and backpack Europe. She literally has to fight for her survival, because at the point in time and place when these group of people were attacking her and her family and her loved ones and her community, she was just there. We needed to save her. She relied on us. Finally, we make it about 3/4 of the way across the river. We see another group of guys hanging out where the boats were at. We started waving them down. They came over, hooked us up, drove us over. We got her off to further triage, and I'm sure she survived. I'm sure she did well, at least for that injury in that period of time. Who knows? I mean, they're still fighting out there. And this is like Jesus. Oh my God. 9 years ago. And they're still fighting. And they had been fighting for 5. Brutal. And so why do I think about this today? If you're a father, there's people who rely on you. And if you could take that fear that you feel of failing them and turn it into something positive and constructive and morph it into a life force and a flow and an energy that supports you in achieving your endeavors, then you will be unstoppable. And there is no current that the forces of the universe could surmount. The odds to be stacked against you in a way to where you would not defeat it with fervor and just demolish it and absolutely just get into absolute clairvoyant focus and just dominate and destroy everything that stood in your way. Just like we were that day on that river, on the Euphrates, one of the original rivers discussed in the history of life, biblical waters. After the battle was over and the enemy had been pushed back quite some ways, we were doing flips off the bridge, and I did a flip and a half, and I crushed my back so hard. Oh, I thought I actually broke ribs, but I didn't. It felt good to jump in the cool waters, laughing, in the midst of everything, in the midst of Chuck Keating, in the midst of all the others that didn't make it to us on time, to all the people that have suffered.